This is Patty. I move to approve the agenda and minutes.
I'll second it.
Hi, I'm Chris. Hi, I'm Chris. Nice to meet everybody. I approve of the agenda, but I'm going to abstain from the minutes.
You.
Aye.
Do you want to have your abstention in the month's minutes?
Yes. Okay. Oh, well.
Sure, actually, sure. So I'll just note we have 3 new commissioners joining us today, Chris Berger, Andrew Harrison, and Mark Schonifer. I think it'd probably be good for everyone to introduce themselves, just say how long you've been on the commission. Everyone hates icebreakers and anything like that, but it'd be good for everyone to get to know who we're all working with. Nick, you'll probably start with you, and I'll let you kind of dictate who goes next.
Jerry, who is your appointing authority? Sure, John Solbach. I live in Lawrence, Kansas. I'm a lawyer just down the street from Chris here. And I don't think we've ever had any cases together, but I sat in some depositions you did of a guy you were suing.
Making friends, yeah.
And I served in the legislature for 14 years, and I've been on the commission since the late 90s. My appointing authority is the minority leader in the House. My wife and I live on a farm west of Lawrence, and I have 2 grown children in their 30s. One lives in Shawnee County, and one lives in Lawrence.
Thank you.
You also served in the Army, didn't you, Kyle? I did.
Patty Dingler. I'm from Wichita. I've introduced myself to the 2 who are here, and then Mark I know from practicing in Wichita. I'm a retired attorney. I've been on since March of 2020, and I was appointed by Governor Kelly.
Hi, I'm Chris Berger. Said hello to everyone so far. I'm a lawyer out of Lawrence, Kansas. I specialize in construction law and eminent domain, primarily living and practicing in the state of Kansas. Don't know what else to really say, other than I'm glad to be here and see what we can do to be about. I'm kind of curious. I was appointed by the chairman of the House, the Speaker of the House. But I'm kind of curious why everyone's so interested in that. Huh, okay.
The commission.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Andrew Harrison. I was appointed by House Minority Leader Vic Miller. Lifelong Kansan from Prairie Village. I currently reside in Manhattan. Soon to be graduate of K-State with a degree in political science. And I'll be attending law school in the fall. So,
Which school?
KU, most likely. I haven't made the final call, but I'm pretty sure. So.
Yes, I do. There's a few little things happening with a couple of our recommendations. Our cryptocurrency recommendation got turned into banning cryptocurrency contributions, which I think the commission is generally fine with. The big one that I think everyone needs to be aware of, however, is HB 2391. HB 2391 is going to be on the House floor tomorrow. I encourage you to reach out to your legislators and tell them to vote against HB 2391. It's 25 pages. It's written by an attorney who has clients under investigation by the commission, and the ultimate effect of it is to legalize a great deal of conduct which is under investigation. We also have a number.
Did you say legalize or illegalize?
Legalize,
okay.
Yes. It would make certain conduct legal. Additionally, it also undermines a lot of what the Ethics Commission does, including running its own hearings. I'm going to go through some of the high points or low points as you would describe, however you would describe them. Coordination with PACs becomes largely legal. They redefine agent in the bill to something that is extremely narrow. They had an amendment which we had no notice of. The amendment still allows volunteers to go work for, or essentially to volunteer with campaigns, make decisions on behalf of those campaigns, and then go intentionally coordinate with PACs. That's still legal under the bill. Contributions in the name of another are entirely legal if they are if the goal is to exceed contribution limits. So anyone could pass money through intermediary entities and to give more than they're legally allowed to normally. They can have candidates give earmark funds that they give to intermediary entities in exchange for giving to other candidates. So someone who has a lot of funds could call up a central committee, party committee, something like that, and say, I'll give you $1,000 if you give it to this candidate. That's legal, even though that's not a permitted use of the campaign fund today. It creates a statute of limitations for us. After some back and forth, they raised the statute of limitations from an original fairly absurd 2-year statute to 5 years, which is better. It is written a little poorly. It's from the first action giving rise to something, which is a little bit different than how other statute of limitations are drafted. It caps fines, so in severe violations, when we have many violations that have occurred, we're capped at a maximum fine of no more than 2 times what one violation could receive in that instance. It undermines the Commission's investigatory subpoena power. There was a very large amendment to this. Originally, the bill removed our subpoena power entirely. The new version of it, again, is poorly drafted, and we could have helped them with it had anyone reached out to us about it, but unsurprisingly, no one did. The new version of it has, when we issue a subpoena, we go to a judge, and the judge has to authorize it. It's a little confusing how that process would happen because the bill is, again, very poorly drafted. But again, no one asked us for input on that text. It prohibits some witness cooperation agreements. There's a Supreme Court case that indicates that we essentially cannot compel testimony in a situation where there hasn't been that there hasn't been a grant of criminal immunity from a DA or AG. This is something that is already the state of the law, and the bill is drafted much broader than the requirements of the Supreme Court case. Something that I think a lot of people are not paying attention to, even though they definitely should, is for some inexplicable reason, one of the items in this bill expands the Anti-SLAPP Act to cover any action by the commission. So anytime that we engage in, if our investigator makes a phone call to ask someone whether something is true or not, then that phone call could trigger attorney fee liability unless we could prove substantial competent evidence to believe that some violation has occurred, which it's unclear how anyone would ever be able to initiate an investigation. It serves no goals of the Public Speech Protection Act, the Anti-SLAPP Act. It doesn't serve a single goal of any kind for us to have all of our actions be subject to it. That's absurd. And it's clearly done to smother investigations early in the process. It changes our appeal standard of review to de novo, which even right now we're subject to the KJRA. The KJRA already handles our standard of review. There's no basis for creating a de novo standard of review. It changes our PAC registration requirements so drastically that that no PAC would ever actually have to register. They would have to both engage in quite a bit of express advocacy, and they would have to have over 50% of their activity be contributions or expenditures. Any half-competent PAC of any real size can manipulate money very easily, and legally they would never have to register, which means essentially the outcome is a fairly substantial wave of dark money in Kansas without any actual basis for it. It lowers PAC registration fees, and the proponents of the bill submitted inaccurate testimony, as with many of these items, to the committee that was considering this. They claimed that there was no intermediate registration fee because they didn't look closely enough at the law. It very clearly does have an intermediate registration amount. The only purpose of doing this is to reduce costs for some large PACs and to reduce the fee fund balances for the commission. It's a backdoor effort to defund the commission. There's some issue involving we can't provide certain reductions in exchange for training, which is something the commission has done historically. It allows candidates to give campaign funds to PACs, which has no basis or rationale of any kind except to serve PACs. That has never been legal in Kansas, and there's no reason to allow it now. There's a poorly drafted part of the bill that expands what campaign funds can be used for, most of which the intention that they're claiming is already legal, and they're putting something in statute that is so poorly drafted that it would expand the ability of campaign funds to be used in a drastic number of circumstances. It would change commissioner requirements so that anyone who has served as chair, vice chair, or treasurer of a political party, people who sought partisan office within the last 5 years or held elective office in the last 3 years, cabinet secretaries, lobbyists in the last 3 years, people who currently serve in political party positions like precinct committee people and state party committee members can serve on the commission as long as they're not the chair, vice chair, or treasurer. All of those are items that are in the bill that allow all of that to occur in the future. It prevents the commission from running its own hearings. Anyone who requests, we have to send the hearing over to the Office of Administrative Hearings, which is a cost to the commission, reduces our ability to have campaign finance experts handle these matters, and essentially takes the commission entirely out of a hearing process. In a purely retaliatory measure, it shifts all civil penalties and fines to the state general fund. There's a policy rationale to take civil fines. There's no similar policy rationale to move civil penalties to the state general fund. Civil penalties are late fees, and this is just, again, a backdoor effort at defunding the commission. There's a few other items that are included as well, some of which are mildly problematic, some of which are not a big deal. I think there's one that's actually a good thing that would allow a disclaimer if someone in the legislature sends a fundraising email and a lobbyist receives it. Then if they put a disclaimer on it saying this is not intended for lobbyists, then they would not have committed a technical violation of the law, which currently they would be. We normally give waivers in those instances. We send them a letter, but this bill covers quite a bit. They also added something in the balloon amendment without any hearing or discussion that makes it even less transparent on independent expenditures. They raised the amount that independent expenditures are disclosed at. So this bill is a variety of disasters, and the intention was to pack as many awful things in the bill as possible to prevent actual discussion. Most of these items weren't even discussed in the committee because outside of my testimony, and I think that was the intention. Proponents focused on one hearing that had issues from quite a while ago. That has nothing to do with 99% of what happens in this bill. So I would encourage you to reach out to your legislators, anything you can do to make sure that this will be heard in the House tomorrow. 2391 should fail. That's the end of my executive director's report. I'll email something to you, yes.
To all of us?
I'll talk to Brett about what I can provide to all commissioners.
If I may. So I know that we're prohibited from having, in our position, from stating we support candidates.
Correct. That is correct.
But we are allowed to advocate for or against legislation.
Yes.
That will be in front of the same people who we're watching over.
Yes, you cannot endorse candidates, but yes, you can advocate for or against legislation. The commission includes in its annual report every year legislative recommendations. For example, it's a fairly standard item that there's legislation that affects the commission, and the commission should be heard on those items. Yes. There's if you go to the legislative website and look up the bill, HB 2391, you can see all the proponent testimony as well. So it's everything is accessible there, and I can also provide anything that you'd like as well. Sure, there's only a few civil penalties. These happen automatically by operation of law. Late filing results in a civil penalty. There's no need for a motion by the commission. The first is for an amended January 10th and July 25th report. Cheryl Reynolds receives a $300 civil penalty. For late registration, Robert Phillips for a PAC receives a $300 penalty. Jeremy Alessi, a treasurer and candidate for state rep, was 8 days late for $80 on the January 10th report. Becky Billigmeyer was a treasurer, was 2 days late for $20. Janet Wall was a candidate, was 2 days late for $20. Stephanie Seeger was a lobbyist who was 17 days late for $900. That is all the civil penalties. And we will have your waiver. We will do the civil penalty waiver momentarily, but this is just the assessment. That's all the civil penalties, and we will, when we get there, we have 13 civil penalty waiver requests that we will go through.
Nick, can I ask another question? So when you're up to this point in time, then, this is like the complete universe of everyone who's been late.
Yes, so this is everyone who we essentially, when someone has a report that's that hasn't been filed, we send what's called a failure to file. That starts the clock for civil penalties. There's a grace period that they can still file within to get no civil penalties. After that grace period, then every day results in a higher civil penalty up to the statutory maximum. Yes, so this is everyone who who is receiving a civil penalty today. There may be a couple who still have a clock running, but I wouldn't think so by this time.
Meaning that there might be someone who hasn't responded yet to the letter.
Meaning that there's someone who might not have maxed out their civil penalty.
Right.
Once they've maxed it out, we put it on the agenda and indicate that it's assessed. But until that time, if, for example, a failure to file went out late for some reason, and that clock might still be running, then that would be a civil penalty we'd assess in March, not today. But typically, this is the universe of civil penalties that we have. The January 10th report, which every candidate, every PAC, every party committee, and every lobbyist has a report due on January 10th. So typically, we have a fair number of civil penalties that are assessed.
So this truly is just ministerial.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, with permission of the chair, if I could skip down to Stephanie Seeger since she is present, I'd like to just in recognition of her time. I'll note first she did submit something in writing. She was assessed $900 and was assessed at the prior meeting. She has never received a civil penalty previously. Her writing indicate this is someone who was in a job transition, and as soon as she had received the forwarded information, she filed immediately. I would recommend a waiver, but she is also present to be heard as well. If I, Mr. Chairman, I forgot that she's a lobbyist for, or was a lobbyist for Children's Mercy, just out of pure maximum transparency. My brother works in the Children's Mercy Network. I imagine they've never had a communication before, but just out of full transparency, I'm just disclosing that.
What is your recommendation?
My recommendation was to waive.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would move we waive, Mr. Chairman.
900. We usually don't include the failure to file letters in the materials. Her letter.
It's next to the last.
It was just received today, so I think it's second to last in the materials. Barbara, was it sent out in a new packet? Yeah.
Yes,
It's in the
it's in the master plan.
Yes. It's a 2-page letter.
For discussion purposes. Yes, he did. So the question here is on the actual penalty, but not the violation. So the violation remains, but the amount of the penalty will be waived.
There's not a finding of a violation. It's just that a failure to file was sent, the report was late. When we talk about finding a violation, we're talking about the civil fine process, having an actual hearing. This is essentially, there's a report due, it was late. The civil penalty was by law, automatically assessed. But it's not necessarily a finding of a violation or anything like that.
I can't say I fully understand that, but okay.
It's like these were.
Absolutely.
Well, and I do want to say, I kind of want to take advantage of my ignorance by expressing my lack of understanding as well as the perceptions that I have.
You're a quick learner. It won't take very long for you to be an expert.
What? Huh?
You're a quick learner. It won't take very long for you to be an expert. These civil penalties are automatic. The only amelioration that can occur is if the commission ameliorates the automatic fine.
But it's a penalty because of a violation, and the violation remains with waiving.
It's a statutory penalty that attaches automatically when something doesn't come in on time. And
I'm just thinking for Ms. Seeger, if she wants to maybe ask for more than just the waiver of the penalty, but actually a statement that the violation be removed, because that seems to be her concern, not the money that's involved. She's nodding her head up and down in an affirmative manner.
I think if we waive the penalty, that'll take care of it. Because it's a statutory fine that we have found that if we pass the motion, that we will have found is not appropriate in the circumstances. She's filed the reports now, so there's no outstanding reports due. It'll just simply mean that she won't be fined for failing to file the report, which now is on file.
Ms. Seeger, does that sound acceptable?
Yeah. Historically, we haven't done anything more in any case other than waive the penalty.
Right, which is the advantage of having new members who can perhaps see some historic flaws in the way that we've just functioned. And that's the real question this month.
There's no complaint.
No complaint.
It was purely ministerial.
It's an automatic fine that is imposed by statute. By waiving the fine, it ought to take care of everything.
Do we have any kind of, is there a regulation we have?
4152 would be the only statute.
The only authority that's given to the commission to ameliorate a civil penalty is to waive all or a portion of it. In regard to the outstanding reports, which have now been filed, if those were to remain unfiled, the commission would, through its processes, have a complaint on file, and it would be noticed up for a hearing, and by doing a complaint, it would necessarily mean that we'd review the complaint for sufficiency. We would continue it out for a review of the complaint for if there was probable cause to exist, whether probable cause exists to believe a violation has occurred, and whether the respondent named in the complaint committed that violation. And then if the probable cause determination is made, then and only then would the matter be scheduled for a hearing. And until there would be a hearing on that complaint, there wouldn't be any finding by the commission that there was a violation of the statute in a formal way. Again, civil penalties are kind of a item unto themselves in that they're assessed by operation of statute, and the authority to ameliorate that, as Mr. Solbach has said, is to waive that. And so that's what we do in those cases. However, if there was a complaint, there would be a lot more process. There would be a hearing before any formal finding of violation could occur.
Right. And I think we understand that, but I think the general public only sees ethics, and that's a problem.
Well, to my knowledge, we never
And
published.
again, she's nodding up and down in the affirmative.
Yeah, I don't think we publish civil penalties on our website at all. Only if we have a civil fine or an amount assessed as part of a finding on a complaint. Is that correct, Mark?
Right, so we have the failure to file on the site, and we also have I don't think we have civil penalties anywhere on our site that I'm aware of. It's
I don't
obviously on
think
our
I'm aware.
agendas that a civil penalty was assessed.
Mhm.
Those materials are public information, potentially searchable. We obviously can't go back and amend an agenda previously that would have included that assessment. I'm looking at 4152. I don't see a way to do some of the statutory way to handle it any other way than by waiving the assessed penalty, unless the penalty was improperly assessed or something like that, which I don't think that's the allegation.
I would suggest that we vote on the motion, and then
If I might, if it's the will of the commission, I can also draft a letter that she would be able to, I mean, obviously when you get a waiver request and it's granted, you have a letter that spells out the fact that a waiver was given. I can draft a second letter as well that spells out essentially why the commission is providing the waiver, and in articulation that we understand that she did everything, that she did quite a bit to resolve any issue immediately, anything like that. Whatever, I can put it together a letter that includes other materials
at
as
least in the
well.
letter, you could say that she was not found to have committed any ethical violation.
You're right, something like that.
Really, I can amend my motion by including that, Mr. Chairman, if the second will go along with me. Well, she's committed no ethical violation.
Right, that's, yes.
Aye.
Let's have a conversation about what might be out there and what might be able to help that situation. But let's have a conversation at the meeting about that. Yes. Not when I get to them. There's a couple that can be grouped, but for the most part, they're pretty straightforward. So, first is Bernice Albers, who's the treasurer of the Chase County Central Committee, was assessed $300 in January. They have not previously received any penalty. They indicate in their waiver request that you have there that they had limited activity. They filed nearly zeros and had then simply did not know they needed to file. They just did not file the report timely. I don't have a recommendation on this particular one. I certainly don't have a problem with it, however.
If there's no motion, then the penalty stands.
Justin Choites, you have his waiver request there. It's $300. He was the treasurer for a PAC. He has not previously received a penalty. This was assessed in September. He's the sole member with multiple jobs. I will tell you that Mr. Choites and I have tried to have him appear. He wants to appear. We've had issues in communication trying to get him to be able to appear. It'd be my recommendation to just waive this in full so that I know he wants to appear and discuss the issue with the commission, but this is we've had a few instances where we've really tried to have him appear and haven't had a lot of success, and that's not his fault that that's happening either. It's just a breakdown in communication. So my recommendation would be just to waive this, or if the commission does not want to waive it in full, my recommendation is to just pass over it for the next meeting, so we can yet again try to have him attend at the March meeting. But my recommendation would be just to waive it. $300.
I would move we waive it. Aye.
Aye.
Stephen Cook is
I'll second the motion.
Aye.
Next is Stephen Cook, the treasurer of the Elk County Central Committee, was assessed $300 in January, had not previously received a penalty. This is a scenario where the previous treasurer disappeared and left the responsibility to the succeeding treasurer. They did comply once they frankly knew what they were required to do. They've even taken steps to ensure that it's a short penalty waiver, but I think it's actually a pretty clear one knowing the circumstances that Mr. Cook has had to deal with. I would certainly recommend a waiver in this instance. It's difficult to assign fault to Mr. Cook for the failures of the previous treasurer.
This is Patty Dangler. I'll move to waive the penalty. Aye.
This is a lobby. Mr. De La Rosa was a lobbyist who was assessed $300 in January, first violation or first penalty. The waiver request indicates that they were dealing with employment transition and a move from Dodge City to Topeka, so a fairly lengthy move as well. This is someone who actually immediately filed after we were given forwarding information for their original from their original address. They did comply as quickly as possible once that information was received. I would recommend a waiver in that instance.
This is a professional lobbyist?
Yes, I'm unsure how long he has been a lobbyist, but yes, it is it's someone who was a registered lobbyist for, at the time, I believe, the city of Dodge City.
I move that we waive the civil penalty for Mr. De La Rosa.
I'll second. This is Patty.
So, sorry. Thank you, appreciate that. So, I mean, it seems right now that we're trying to figure out who gets waivers, who doesn't. It seems kind of arbitrary as to yes or no. Do we have any guidance as to, like, if you're a locality, is it a state issue, is it a lobbyist, is it a PAC? Do we have any history or guidance on that?
We have to use our own judgment, and what's helpful to me is the recommendation of the executive director.
Well, I think we're here to exercise our own judgment.
I know that, but one thing that is helpful to me is the recommendation of the executive director. I don't always agree with the executive director, but it's helpful for me to know where the executive director is coming from.
Okay.
Some people ask for a waiver, some people don't. Sometimes it's very clear that for equitable reasons we should waive. Sometimes it's not so much. We have to use our own judgment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Otherwise, it kind of feels like a beauty pageant, and I mean, that's very subjective, but judgmental in the exercise of discretion. What John is saying.
There is a quote in the Shakespeare's Henry V play Portia says it, she says, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. It is the mightiest in the mightiest, and we are the mightiest." All right.
Aye.
Nay.
Polly Denton was the treasurer for the Morton County Central Committee, was assessed $40 in January. She has previously received a waiver of $300 in October 2020. I'm unaware of the circumstances of the 2020 waiver. She indicates in her waiver request that the organization had no cash flow. She also indicates perhaps a lack of ability to pay and is considering terminating the organization. She indicates in the waiver request as well that she is not sure why that it was received late. It was received by the Secretary of State's office and stamped on November 25th, which is after the deadline. So I have no recommendation on this item. It is a $40 penalty, but I have no rec.
Mr. Harris? I do.
Well, personally, it seems as though we've waived everyone else's penalty so far, and if we're taking facts at face value as they're stated in these letters, then we probably should accept this is also factual, and she submitted it on time to her knowledge, and it wasn't received on time. So I would say personally that I would vote to waive that. But
Are you making a motion?
Well, he's asking the question of the new people.
I know, I'm asking you a question. Is he making a motion?
I am not making a motion currently.
Sure. So whenever I review a waiver request, whenever I'm discussing it with the commission, I try to not to put people in boxes because facts are unique in each of these circumstances. And frankly, some people are better at describing the facts underlying their situation than others. However, I'm trying to put them into a box of what the normal categories are that we handle. So, for example, if someone is asserting a medical waiver, that's a box, and that's something that the commission typically is rather generous towards and understanding of. And I think there was one instance in historically for one particularly large penalty and fine that the commission ultimately did provide a waiver for when they asserted a medical claim, but only after the commission had asked. They wanted more details because they only provided a couple of sentences. But generally speaking, these are categories that all interact in different ways. For example, this one we have someone who they filed zeros. It means that there was whether or not there was is there a transparency benefit that has been lost to Kansans because this report was not on file? Less so in the case where a report filed zeros. They assert that they probably would have some issues being able to pay, which the commission has historically been somewhat understanding of at times. However, just simply being late and saying, well, I submitted it on time is not usually enough. That is a box, but saying I put it in the mail and I don't know why it wasn't received on time is usually not enough for the commission to consider a waiver. I have no recommendation in this item because it does fall into a couple of categories that the commission has at times been generous of or has provided partial waivers for. It's tough to provide a partial waiver and a $40 penalty, I think, which is part of why this is no recommendation, but also the assertion that it was something that they had thought they had submitted timely and did not is something that we typically don't provide waivers for, or that the commission does not typically provide waivers for. So it's, I think this is one where there's arguments in both directions. It does fall into a few boxes where the commission has provided waivers, and it falls into some boxes where the commission has not. And so on any of these issues, just like anything, it has to be decided on the facts. But I do try to categorize as much as possible for the commission to create some consistency in practice. If I may pause for a moment, we are approaching 2 o'clock, and there is a public hearing that's scheduled originally for 1:30. I just wanted to see if someone could, Brett, do you mind poking your head up, seeing if Mr. Briggs happens to be here? If he is, we could proceed with the hearing and then come back to this, just in respect of his time.
He's not here.
Okay, well, we can continue the penalty waivers then. I was just trying to give him the opportunity if he is here. So the next one is Nelson Gabriel. It's also on behalf of Bishop Hood, his treasurer. Mr. Gabriel was assessed $1,000 and his treasurer was assessed $300. Those are the maximums for the particular report. Mr. Gabriel's waiver request is that, neither of them have received a penalty previously. This is their first penalty. They indicated that they lost the primary and had no other funds, filed a report with zeros, and had some mail delivery issues. I'll note the mail delivery issues are because they had registered a P.O. box, and then that's what they had put as their appointment of treasurer. That's where we have to send mail. But they had closed the P.O. box, and so we had no way to get some mail to them. We had some.
Did you get the mail returned?
Yes, some mail was indeed returned from that. We did eventually get in touch with him and resolve the issue. We had some phone conversations with him as well. My understanding is those phone conversations occurred quite a while before the actual filing of the report occurred, but I'm not sure it would have reduced the ultimate penalty. I would recommend a waiver for Mr. Hood, his treasurer. My understanding from talking to our state campaign finance desk is that as far as we can tell, Mr. Hood had very little responsibility for the underlying issue, and we would recommend either a partial waiver or would make no recommendation for Mr. Gabriel. Having lost a primary and just simply not filing a report because you lost the primary and didn't think you had anything more to file means that they're simply just not reading mail we're sending them. But they did have no funds and they filed a report with zeros, and yes, some mail did have issues getting to them. All of those are true. So again, there are categories that apply, some in their favor, some against. So I would recommend to waive for his treasurer, Mr. Bishop Hood, and would recommend I would have either no recommendation or partial waiver for Mr. Gabriel.
So what happens with the civil assessment? Does that get converted into some form of judgment that's executable?
It's Brett, the civil penalty assessments under 4152. If you could comment on.
Well, generally speaking, these are considered a debt to the agency, and we go through the Kansas. Well, I'm not going to think of the official name of it, but we call it debt set-off. And so we register the debt there after we've made 3 attempts to collect the debt. And we keep a record of those letters that go out. We also have some of those notices go out as certified mail. And then when there's not been a response, and we're usually fairly generous in the amount of time, maybe 6 months after my collection letter goes out, and I'm the last one to send a letter, then at that time we enter that into debt set-off, and at some point in time, if the state ever owes that individual money, they'll impose a set-off against whatever is owed, and that's usually how these are collected, because they're usually not very large.
Does that include tax money?
Yes, yeah, income tax returns. Also anything from the federal government. If federal government monies are owed to an individual, those also may be attached under our set-off program.
And you can also bring a lawsuit against them, can't you?
Oh yeah, you can bring a limited actions lawsuit in district court, or in occasions where we have civil fines that are larger, we have employed a collection agency. So.
I would move one. I would move. Also, the motion.
Solbach seconds.
Aye.
I wish to abstain on both, on that motion, and record it in the minutes, please.
Max Knopp was the treasurer for Integrity in Kansas House. A PAC was assessed a $1,000 penalty in January 2023. This was his first penalty that he's received. His waiver request indicates really it's two categories. It's that they went inactive after their primary candidate. We normally see this category apply to candidates when they lose the primary. They say, well, we didn't know we had to file the general report because they're not reading their mail. This is a PAC who had a similar issue. They were only supporting a candidate in the primary. They did report zeros. There's really just two categories that we're talking about, and that they were inactive after the primary, which is something that we normally don't provide waivers for, and that they ultimately filed a report with zeros, which is something the commission sometimes does consider in providing partial waivers. I have no recommendation on this particular item. That's a good question. I can look up when the first appointment of treasurer was filed for the organization. It's an organization that I'm not particularly familiar with, so it's probably a fairly new one. But I hesitate to say that as a basis for something when I need to go actually look it up myself. So give me just a moment, I'll answer that question. If my computer would ever actually load a browser window.
While you're looking that up, what is the amount?
$1,000.
Am I missing it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I just bring a cookie.
I don't need a cookie. Too many cookies already.
He's only been around since, at least in this capacity, since April 2022. So it's a fairly new organization. Probably, I don't know if he was involved in any other organization before that, but probably less experienced. I think that's accurate. $1,000. Next is Christopher McGowan. He was assessed $1,300. It's actually two civil penalties. He has he has a fairly lengthy waiver request there that's about a page and a third. This really comes down to a few categories in my reading of it. It does have that he does appear to be owning up to responsibility for the late filing of the reports. Indicates he was inactive after losing the election and then personally paid for most of his campaign, which is a category we sometimes apply similar to filing zeros. It's there's there's not as much transparency benefit to the public when they are paying for their own campaign themselves. They didn't answer some mail that was sent to them, but the $1,300 may be higher than is necessary to deter this person from any future issues regarding this, especially in light of the fact that they are owning up to mistakes. The commission may consider a partial waiver. I do not have a recommendation for Mr. McGowan, however. Dan Meyerhoff was a lobbyist who was assessed $300 in January. This is his first penalty despite 5 years of being a lobbyist. He's always been in compliance previously. He indicated basically that he was traveling and missed and then as a result of his travel, he missed our communications with him about that. As soon as he received the mail, he did contact our lobbying coordinator, Jessica White, and filed it properly. This is the first, typically when someone has been compliant for a very long period of time and they make one mistake, The commission is often generous in those instances. After talking to our lobbyist desk, she agrees that this would be one that we recommend waiving the $300.
This is a professional lobbyist?
Yes.
And the executive director of a association of conservation districts? We just missed it.
Yes, I believe that is the case.
Right.
I'll second the motion. Aye.
Nay.
We may need a count on that. We may need a count on that, Mr. Chairman. I think it was very close.
You would have to ask for a. Yes.
Aye.
Nay.
Nay.
Aye.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
Arturo Perez is a fairly straightforward one. We actually had previously given he was previously assessed a $300 penalty. The commission reduced it to $50 if paid within 30 days. He actually wrote the check and did not put it in the mail within that 30 days. We do have the check in office now. He's essentially asking for an extension of that time period so that this can be accepted as within the normal waiver range. I certainly would encourage, this is essentially a motion the motion would be to permit extension of the original 30-day waiver window to allow for us to accept the reduced penalty today.
Aye.
Next is Cheryl Reynolds, the treasurer, at the time the treasurer for the Kansas State Republican Party. She was assessed $300 for just now at this meeting, just moments ago. This is her first penalty despite serving in treasurer capacities in a few areas. This is someone who actually, these are fairly technical issues that she was working to resolve. She actively did work with our office in order to resolve these issues. In fact, even coming into our office to discuss how best to fix a particular issue. This is someone who has worked to fix the errors that are underlying the issue. I would certainly recommend waiver. If someone who has worked this hard to resolve the issues ends up with a penalty, I think she understands and is deterred from any future late filing of reports, and this is someone, again, who worked to resolve the issue. So I would recommend waiver. 300. When we are working with them before the failure to file goes out, then yes, we often do hold the failure to file as long as they're actively working towards it. The issue was the failure to file went, and once that failure to file is put in the mail, the civil penalty clock starts. We can't stop or abate it. It just is what it is at that point. But we do hold, on occasion, we do hold civil penalty failure to files if they've contacted us to resolve them at that before that goes into the mail. So yes. It was not.
Aye.
And I abstain.
We're almost done. I promise. We've made it through the mountain. The last one is Tab Turner, a treasurer for candidate Heather Kinsler. Turner was assessed $300 in January. It's their first penalty. They assert a mail issue, and they are taking responsibility for the underlying violation. I have no recommendation with respect to Turner. But yes, primarily we're discussing a mail issue and taking responsibility of the underlying problem.
Is he also asking for a waiver for somebody else?
Yes, on behalf of Heather Kinsler. I believe the treasurer really was responsible for it, and I would encourage a waiver for Ms. Kinsler's as perhaps a separate item, but I don't have a recommendation for Tab Turner.
I would move.
I believe $1,000 for Ms. Kinsler.
I would move.
Yeah, Tab Turner is making the request on behalf of both of them. The way it's written, it's almost like it's only a request for Ms. Kinsler, but I think we can consider it for both Turner and Kinsler. The treasurer is taking responsibility for the issue and is essentially saying that they would like that there's no reason to assess Ms. Kinsler with a penalty. So that's the outcome that they are asking for.
I'll second the motion.
Yes, she has received a civil penalty. I believe the penalty is $1,000, but since it's not, she wasn't the one who submitted the penalty. This is something that we didn't look up prior to the meeting. So this is, but I can certainly get that information later, and we can handle it at another date. But I'm not sure that the amount. I'm not sure the amount is particularly important one way or the other for Ms. Kinsler based on the assertions by Tab Turner.
I think it's $1,000.
I think it is $1,000.
Yeah.
Yes. When we just received the waiver request from Tab Turner. I imagine that we reviewed it as that this is a request by Turner and addressed it accordingly. So it was received, I think, yesterday. No, we have not.
But he's asking on her behalf.
Correct.
are you withdrawing your motion and moving to, instead to bypass until next month? Okay, I'll withdraw my second, and I'll second your substitute motion.
Very-
We can confirm, appears he is not appeared, so we can move forward with the hearing.
Okay. My name is John Sworbach, and I've been appointed as the hearing officer in this matter in the case of Mark Scoveland versus George A. Briggs, complaint number 739. And I hereby call this hearing to order. This is a complaint where the okay. This is a complaint, and where the penalties are 5,000 for the first, 10,000 for the second, 15,000 for the third violation. Is my understanding that the respondent in this matter has not appeared today? That he was noticed today that there was a hearing?
Brett Berry appearing on behalf of the commission. The respondent does appear
You're appearing on behalf of Mark Scoveland, I think.
okay. Appearing on behalf of the complainant, Mark Scoveland. George Arlen Briggs is not present. We've checked in the foyer area.
Right. Well, you've already stated the appearances. Would you like to proceed on a proffer?
We would be requesting judgment by default in regard to complaint number 739. In a hearing of this matter, the complainant would have the following evidence that they would provide. Testimony by the way of the complainant and or Karina Renna, who is staff with the agency, would be that George Arlen Briggs was a candidate for statewide office, in this case governor, that pursuant to his candidacy, a contribution and expenditure report or receipts and expenditure report would have been due July 25th, 2022. That report would be due in filing with the Secretary of State as of the time of the complaint, as well as recently as before the meeting today. That report has not been filed, and based upon that, we would ask for the default judgment because the allegations in the complaint are that the report remains unfiled.
Okay, and this is just one violation?
Correct.
Okay.
And I was going to say, we do have perfected service by certified mail signed return receipt indicating that Mr. Briggs received the notice of hearing today on February 14th, 2023.
Okay. Commissioners, you've heard the proffer by the counsel for the complainant. Are there questions of counsel or of the complainant?
Do we have proof of service of the actual complaint?
I would imagine so. Let's see. There's the complaint. Not sure what that certified mail summary receipt was for. Did you happen to mail the complaint with the, notice of hearing?
I don't think so, we just mailed them this screen. It would be.
Mark, I know you looked at the file earlier. Did you happen to look for that?
In the back of the complaint.
Is it,
We usually summon first class and certified. Just look for the service of process that says it will have first class as well.
well, we, have the, certified mail that went out in August, 27th, I believe, which is consistent with the date of the execution of the complaint. Letter to Mr. Briggs with the complaint inside. It was returned to us as refused. We usually send out simultaneously a first-class mailing at the same time. And that was also done at the same time. So based upon the fact that the first-class mailing has not been returned to us, but only the certified mailing has, I would submit that the service of the subpoena is complete.
Does that answer your question?
Of the
That's
complaint.
the complaint though, yes.
Are there further questions from the commission?
Oh, I suppose so. Did he make any kind of response in any manner?
Well, he came to the office one day and wanted to be heard on the matter, and we said that we would keep him notified of the hearing date. What he was going to say, he didn't tell us.
So he's not.
So I did talk to him, and he was aware of the complaint and the allegations of the complaint, and he indicated that he wanted to be heard.
Did he ever express to you any general denial or actual defense?
No.
Are there further questions from the commission?
Yes, certified mail of the notice was signed for by George A. Briggs on February 14th.
Does the commission have further questions? Okay, you've heard the proffer and the evidence, and so the commission needs to take action. We can take action in a bifurcated fashion. First of all, to find whether or not there was a violation, and then second of all, to impose a fine. Is there a motion from a commissioner?
This is Patty, I move to find a violation.
Is there a second to the motion? It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? So hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Is there a motion to impose a fine? We can impose up to $5,000.
In issues where there is a report that is outstanding that has not been filed, the historical practice of the commission over at least the last couple of years is to assess $5,000 with a substantial reduction, usually to $1,000, if the report is filed and the reduced amount is paid within a certain time frame, which usually is 30 days, but on occasion has been longer. That's the regular, that has been the practice before, but obviously we have 3 new commissioners now, and that practice could alter.
Has this individual had other violations, in any record, I guess I would say,
He's had other penalties that have been assessed for late filing of reports.
for this campaign or for prior campaigns?
I think for prior campaigns, I don't. He has civil penalties that are outstanding for these reports that are outstanding that have not been filed. I believe prior campaigns as well. He received penalties for that he had to pay prior to becoming a candidate, because you can't have outstanding penalties and fines in order to be a candidate. He came into our office and paid those before he became a candidate for the gubernatorial race. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioners, you've heard the recommendation of the executive director that we impose a $5,000 fine, but reduce that to $1,000 if he becomes compliant and pays the $1,000 within 30 days. Does any commissioner desire to make a motion? Motion has been made. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. This concludes the matter of this hearing, and the hearing is now closed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We can include any materials that the commission requests. Historically, the commission has only asked for, desired the actual copy of the complaint, but we can always include other materials as long as it doesn't rise to the level of being an exhibit that we would have to introduce in support of the violation. That's the part of why we only include the complaint, but we can certainly have discussions about other materials that we could include. Complaints typically have quite a few documents. There are failure to files. I mean, if someone has a hearing for failure to file a report, then they've received a lot of communications from us at that point. And frankly, it would be a lot of communications to include all of them, but certainly some of them could be included without overwhelming the commission, and we could certainly include all of them if that's the desire of the commission. We serve all of you, so.
Yeah, it looks like the next time is the executive session, and then we just return and break.
There's
Right. No, sorry, I was unclear. So after the inquiry, then we go to executive session, and then we return and adjourn.
I believe there'll be 2 executive sessions, but yes.
Well, the idea is after those
Yes.
sessions, we were just, okay, well, if I may, talk about 2 different things before we get into kind of the executive and then move on. So I've been sitting here and I've been digesting the idea of advocating for or against legislation, excuse me. And it makes me very uncomfortable that we would, as the entity who is overseeing the individuals who will vote on any legislation, to advocate anyway for or against, because they will know who we are and that at some point in time they would be under our review. So I question that as a good practice. I question that as a proper practice. We have an executive director who can do that as a function. Even that might be suspect, but certainly as commissioners and the ones who review, vote, determine penalties, determine compliance, that feels wrong to me.
And in 20-some years that I've been on the commission, I have never testified before the legislature. I have never contacted my appointing authority over an issue before this commission, and I've never contacted my legislator over an issue before this commission or legislation that was pending. Kansas didn't always have an ethics commission. The ethics commission came out of the early 1970s, really the Richard Nixon administration. And Kansas in 1974, with a Republican majority, passed one of the first ethics laws in the nation. Newsweek magazine cited Kansas as being an example for other states. The ethics laws were meant to curb some of the abuses that I think Pete McGill was speaker at the time. I don't know if you know who Pete McGill was, if you knew him or not. But the purpose of the ethics laws was to create a commission and to try to deal with some of the abuses that they saw going on in Washington. You can't curb those abuses if you got the ethics law, and no one is in a better position to know what the ethics laws are supposed to do and the effect of getting the ethics law would have than members of the Ethics Commission. I'm not bothered by our executive director's request that we reach out to our legislators. I may do that for the first time, but we've never had an issue come before us like this. We've never had the legislature try to gut the ethics law or eviscerate the Ethics Commission as this bill does. I mean, this is something that's happened for the first time since 1974 when the original ethics laws were passed. Now, we are a creature of the legislature, and the legislature has changed our name from Ethics Commission to Public Disclosure Commission to something else, and then ultimately back to the Ethics Commission. And someone made the point, the lady who appeared before us today, that she's very proud of her reputation and doesn't want to be cited for having an ethics violation. And we accommodated her. I'm reminded of a time when the Ethics Commission found that a group of state employees had violated the ethics laws, but they didn't do so intentionally, and they essentially did so because their employer had told them to go to a hotel and have dinner to see if that was a proper hotel for some meeting to be held. And we recognize the fact that they really didn't do it intentionally, and we fined them $1. They appealed it because they didn't want that ethics violation on their record. And they won their appeal. But we have an example here of someone who was trying to completely gut the ethics law and completely eviscerate the Ethics Commission. And so it's something different that has ever happened before.
It may be different, but that doesn't make it appropriate. We are still the entity who watches over every person in that domed building. And they will know that.
They will.
And they will think that we will remember whether they vote for, against, or otherwise. And I think that is, as the Ethics Commission, that carries a lot of weight, there's a lot of power behind the commission, and they are all aware of that. I mean, we've seen them be upset, and that's in the news. So I'm stating my belief that the entity who is overseeing those individuals does not have has given up the ability to go forward and then try to influence them.
One way of looking at this is that the sponsors of this bill and those who support this bill have the intention to commit a crime in Kansas. Because what they are taking away from that legislation will no longer make it a crime to do the things that they have the intention of doing. And instead of doing the crime and then secreting themselves, they intend to change the law so that they can carry out those criminal intentions without being criminally liable. And that is what's different about this than anything else that I've seen in the 20-some years I've been on this commission.
I think that the statute that provides our annual report includes that we provide legislative recommendations as part of our annual report. Historically, we recommend that the legislature take certain action to improve the laws under our jurisdiction. I also think that while I think that there is definitely merit to Commissioner Berger's concerns, I also think that Commissioner Solbach is right as well, that this is a unique challenge that would serve to undermine our ability to enforce the laws. It changes this isn't a scenario where we're talking about someone increasing contribution limits. There's a bill to do that, and that's fine. The legislature does what it does. This is categorically different. It is an attack on the Ethics Commission and should be viewed accordingly. And if the Ethics Commission, if individual commissioners want to be heard on that item, they should be allowed to do so. But at the same time, that doesn't mean anyone is certainly obligated to do so. And anyone with reservations certainly is not obligated to advocate one way or the other.
Apologies. Well, I want one other inquiry, if I may. Do we keep any statistics as to the number of penalties that arise? And do we keep those statistics based off of like locality? So do we find bigger problems on like township levels, city levels, county levels, state levels? And do we keep track separately of PACs, of lobbyists, and just all different kind of sizes of violations so that we can maybe better target education?
Sure, we don't do much separate tracking like that. We report it in our annual report separately. So civil penalties received or assessed, waived, and collected by lobbyists under the Campaign Finance Act,
Right.
PACs and parties. Those are all reported separately in the annual report. In terms of internal tracking of those,
What I was thinking also was total numbers.
Mhm.
So if there are 5 PACs that are out there and 4 of them are doing it wrong, then that is kind of a meaningful statistic.
I agree, right? And I think that's a good idea.
Could we do something like that?
Yep, absolutely. That's absolutely doable.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
He's there. Mr. Nye is sitting right here.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members of the commission. The previous discussion, I think, was really helpful because that's exactly what I wanted to talk about today, which was the one person that's not sitting at this table and doesn't regularly sit at your table is the public. And I would like to ask, what are the ways in which the public can provide input, good faith input, regarding constructive criticism or constructive suggestions, especially when there is a breakdown in communications with the staff that you oversee. You are the commission that oversees the Governmental Ethics Act, the Campaign Finance Act. I'm a practitioner. I've appeared before you for the past 14 years. I've had cases in front of this commission. And I wasn't prepared today to respond directly to both staff and commissioners' comments that the bill that I drafted that incorporates, again, 14 years worth of issues that I think could be clarified in the law, not only procedurally and substantive, but that those suggestions would somehow be labeled as trying to legalize criminal activity, or shameless, or that they're sad, that they're trying to undermine a current investigation. And so the question that came to my mind was, how do I even communicate with the commission? If each commissioner is going to weigh Executive Director Scoglin's comments or Council Berry's comments in determining how they view a particular piece of legislation, and this is not the only piece of legislation brought by either a respondent or an attorney for a respondent this session. Just yesterday, there was a piece of legislation that would reduce liability for treasurers that the executive director testified neutrally, but he stated in committee as favorably to that. And so how can the public provide our input and good faith input without being labeled as obstructionists? The bill that has been brought is not, there's not one statute in your Campaign Finance Act in HB 2391 that is being repealed. Nothing is being gutted. These are constructive suggestions. And I said in my testimony, which you all can read, I said in my testimony that these are the laws that I would want if Executive Director Scovelin's roles in any given case before you would switch every other case. This has to do with due process, it has to do with clarity of law, and just like a Supreme Court decision that might determine that a statute is vague and ambiguous, and the legislature has to come in, so too a practitioner can say, I think that this is vague and ambiguous, the legislature should clarify, and then everyone can come to the dome and argue what it should be. But to make a public policy argument, make a public policy recommendation in the legislature has now been determined to be equivalent to obstruction of justice and criminalizing or legalizing criminal activity. And these are on investigations that there are no filed complaint. They're supposed to be confidential. And at this point, we have issues before the commission that you are weighing in on the specific laws at issue, and you're expected to neutrally serve as an adjudicator 2 years down the road on this. And so all that to say that the questions I have that I would like the commission to consider is, would you be willing to add a public comment session to your meetings? Would you be willing to invite the public? Will the commission take input through some sort of email address? I don't know if the email address that has been given in the past just goes to staff, or does it get passed on to the commissioners? Am I responsible when I send correspondence to the commission? Am I responsible for trying to find your email addresses? I pulled your substantial interest forms just to try to find contact information, and the email address is not on there. So I don't know how to talk to you all. The last few things, I know I'm over my time.
Mr. Chairman, if Mr. Nye wishes to lecture us further, we might want to set up another time for him at another meeting. I think his 2 minutes are up.
I very much appreciate that, because I am coming in good faith. I'm coming in as a practitioner who will have cases before you in the future. And so, so the first question is, where is the seat at the table for the public? And specifically, if I wanted to send my comments, and I'm going to talk about this in just a second, that I attached a detailed spreadsheet of every single provision in HB 2391 before my testimony was submitted. If I wanted to send that to the commission to see if there's any consensus whatsoever, how would I do that? If I, as a practitioner, don't know how to do that, who regularly appears before you, who regularly talks to staff and emails staff, how would the public know to do that? And is it filtered through staff, especially if we have a deep disagreement on the state of the law with staff? How can the public have redress to be able to bring constructive and good faith comments to the commission?
Staff was never consulted before you filed that bill. So I think you're disingenuous in your comments.
Yes. I do not want to leave this room without saying that I am asking, how can I consult the commission when there's a breakdown in agreement or the possibility of consensus with staff? I respect staff because we have to litigate together. We're gonna have to litigate in the future, but you are the adjudicators. So ultimately, on the advisory opinions, does the commission take input on proposed advisory opinions interpreting law under the commission's jurisdiction prior to finalizing and issuing the advisory opinions? I know that in the rule and reg process, the public can weigh in as a public comment, but if there is disagreement, and it would be helpful to the commission to see how this is perceived by the legal community, would it be a good idea to open up more of your proceedings to where you can have more voices than just your own staff? And then finally, with respect to lobbying, I'm not gonna weigh in on whether an agency should, an executive director should, but does the agency's Twitter page speak for the commission as a body? Because I don't think the public knows the difference, especially when it's labeling the proponents of these bills, which is basically me, and the widespread media coverage as far as who I represent or have represented as a means of attacking my motives for bringing the bill. And so if that speaks for the commission, then I think that there will in the future potentially be legal issues if the commission is going to try to serve as an adjudicator in these same types of things. Thank you for your time. I would respectfully request, if there is a way to communicate via email in between, one way, obviously, I don't expect any engagement from the commission, but to pass on information for the commission's consideration between meetings. Thank you.
Could we take a break, Mr. Chairman? Yes.
Bathroom, So as part of the onboarding, do we get a special email address or anything like that? Or is it all just the name?
We just use the one that you've designated.
Right.
Okay, but if there are any questions, Mr. Berger, you can send those to Mark, or you can send those to myself.
Oh, and I was curious.
Yeah, right, we don't assign, simply because of access and security, that all goes along with the process of establishing an employee ID, and, we just don't for board members and commissions. So, Mark, do you know?
Real quick, thank you for making your voice heard. We don't have to agree, and I really appreciate when people speak up.
Mm-hmm. Is that a question there on that? Was that just your own personal question?
That was my personal
Oh,
question.
okay.
Yeah, I know working for the AG's office, obviously as, a real employee,
Right,
I had an address that was specifically KSAG. And I don't know,
your
maybe,
state address,
exactly.
okay,
So, and I know that when my wife is done committee work, she always aides to have a personal address.
Right.
So she's always made a Gmail account that was,
Right,
you know, whatever it might be, VP of PEO, whatever. and
Right.
it'll say it.
and it sounds to me like, I think one of probably the priorities with that is, that you keep, it's separate and distinct. That
Right.
way if there's ever a question,
A Quora issue?
exactly,
I mean,
and
we're
so-
kind
right, and I do, encourage you to have that, maybe a separate, and that's up to you to designate that. And
Wait,
it's my understanding, go ahead,
So you recommend a separate email address specifically
from a
for,
personal standpoint, we don't make you sign off on any kind of agreements. You know, from a state board commission point of view. But, you know, it's always been, you know, conveyed with me that, if you're in and there's nothing on the SSI process that I know of, it's a good idea to have a designated email address for your role. If it's, you know, I'm gonna use the example of if you're applying for a job, you know, just from my example, my husband and I have an email address that we both use for just, you know, our personal living. But then when it comes to applying for a position, I sit through a training, a learning on, you know, basics. If you're gonna apply for a position, I don't want it to show up, you know, I don't want my email address to show as my husband and I's email. You should have something iconic of you. For example, if you're gonna be in another role, it might be a good idea to have, you know, and we've always given, it's my understanding, and Mark might be able to speak to this a little bit more, because I can, you know, just explain that I've only been with the commission for less than a year. Mark, do you have any recommendations as far as having, when you've indicated that designate your own email address, we're happy to send that wherever that designated email address is.
Yep.
And you may have priorities with that. And
Yeah,
one
I mean, the
priority
general
may be-
inbox is a general inbox. We don't have, I mean, there's
Right.
no @KGEC email addresses for commissioners. So,
It's there.
yeah, so
Is that
some,
something to consider?
it'd be a cost to the agency.
To just use a state email?
Yep, we have to pay per
Oh,
account.
yeah, all the inter-trans.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
Or you could create your own,
Well,
email
I'm
address.
thinking also a little bit
The
about.
The issue is I don't wanna trigger a TOMA problem, right?
Right.
Exactly.
So,
Right.
that's the real issue there,
Right.
is we need to be able to have information be passed to commissioners, which we currently do through the general inbox. But we need to make sure that it's done in a way, just like we do with commission materials, that cannot trigger an interactive communication.
Right,
Cause that would be the problem there,
right.
so.
And Mark, how do you feel about them, you know, from a record standpoint, establishing a email address?
Well,
Whatever
the
their
other
priority
problem
may
is
be.
that people with a case before the commission cannot have private communications with commissioners, so if, that's the other issue that might come up as well. The 1963, I think is the reg. But yeah, so there are ways that we can do this, we just have to be cautious and aware of our legal obligations.
Right. Did that answer your question too?
It did.
Well,
Yeah.
Chris, are you having fun yet?
Sitting next to you, John, I always have fun. Usually with cocktails though, so I'm a little disappointed.
What?
Usually we have cocktails. So
That's
I'm
right.
a little disappointed.
Usually we sat across from each other. Yeah, it was, who was that realtor that you were suing?
I don't remember.
Bill Fair.
Bill Fair. Are they still around?
I think they are. I
And
learned things about Bill
did you
Fair I didn't even
have
know.
those documents, those forms?
What about the,
The-
yeah, I have my notes done.
We can touch base.
I'm trying.
No, it's okay, to follow up
You're trying to what?
after
Get these down.
at the conclusion of the meeting.
Yeah.
I've given, some of the, forms to the onboarding orientation,
Oh, okay.
so.
Brett, you think 5 minutes for the first one?
So if you,
It'll be fairly
Mr. Berger, by
Yeah.
chance, if
Short.
your email address, just let us know which
30 for the
email
second.
address you
Yeah.
want, but we, for now, we'll maintain the email
With
address
the-
that you provided.
Or do you wanna start with
What's the
20 and just
biographical
see what people wanna
information
say?
We've just included it as part of the bio.
I don't wanna lock everyone in the room
your
for 10 minutes
file
longer
here.
than we have to,
It's a
I don't see how we get
It's
it
up to
done
you.
unless, I don't see how we get
form
it done
that
unless
we've
30,
always
so.
included just basic information.
Yeah, let's do the second,
And
let's do
so,
5 and 30.
Public document or not?
It's not a public document, it'll be part of your board file, which is confidential.
Do I need to fill out the I-9 or are you gonna do that?
You, that
Really?
would be against the law
You
for
can't?
me to complete it.
Oh, didn't
I have
realize
to, I can, observe you completing it, because there's a portion that I have to
that.
sign.
Oh,
But we'll pay you the, per diem, the $35 per meeting that you're in, and that is taxable. So we'll have to complete the tax forms necessary for that. However, the travel, subsistence, that won't be, it's just basically paid to you. But then the direct deposit information that you provide will be submitted to both the personnel, the payroll side, and also the smart side, which is our accounts and receivables for the truck. So we'll have that information, so that, when we submit it, it'll be automatically deposited to whatever account we assign.
gotcha. If you brought a check with me.
You know,
Cause I never
that's
remember
a
reading numbers.
technicality. If you have the information and you want to send that later on, we can still get it in and get it processed. But we have some flexibility with that. So if you want to just, their biggest priority with that is just to make sure that you're
So
writing
do you
number.
live in Manhattan?
You're writing
I
number
do,
and your account
yeah.
number. We don't transfer.
Right by
Okay.
City Park.
And we
Exactly.
have a
You know where the International Center is?
I think that
International
the,
Center?
Yes,
Um,
yeah.
accounting people
I,
do a lot of Heartline if we transpose
I
those numbers
co-wrote
down
the
to the.
proposal that,
Really?
put in $250,000
That was a recent
donation
scam
to build
too,
that place.
Okay.
Yeah.
against lawyers. They would,
Back in
people would
19,
retain
I think
a
I
lawyer
wrote the proposal.
Uh-huh.
and then they'd
It's a
send
cool
a check
building,
that magically
isn't
came.
I was
And the
there
routing
in,
number would be transposed.
77 when they did it.
And it wouldn't fail
Yeah.
the routing until about
It's
15
a nice
days
building.
in.
It's
And
cool.
magically,
Kinda
before that
fits
15
in.
days, they'd ask for
You
an
know where
advance.
Weber Hall is?
Yeah.
There was actually a lawyer here
I
in
went
town who got
to
hit for about
see Dan Weber,
$65,000.
who had, his office was behind
It was
those.
quite- it was
big
very elaborate.
glass windows.
We knew there was a scam coming through, and my partner and I were like,
Okay.
we won't get fooled.
And,
Let's
I
just
asked
follow
him
this
if
through.
he would help us.
And,
because he was involved in that
they were really
international
good.
program. He said he was too
Fake
busy.
phone number,
Uh-huh.
fake
but,
phone book
I
entry,
had spent about an hour with him.
really crazy.
And he gave
You
me
know, it just,
pointers that were critical to us.
it's
And he
amazing.
stood
It's like,
with
what
me
will they
when
think of
we
next?
dedicated
I
the
know.
building in
And just when you thought that you wouldn't see,
Cool. Yeah,
You
right
do.
across from
It's
the
crazy.
another.
Pretty
Yeah.
much, so.
very
Okay, hopefully someone's a tax person. If I do more allowances, does that mean more is withheld?
Why did you build?
less,
Less.
yeah. The more, the less.
The more deductions, no. The more dependents, the less is withheld. So if you just put down as yourself as an individual and that's it, they'll hold a lot more, you'll get some of that back, maybe.
Oh, I never get back.
I think the standard is about an actuarial 27-28%.
So when
On
are
a
you
standard
moving to
deduction.
Lawrence?
August.
That's
No,
interesting.
I haven't,
Useful spot.
haven't done
But it
apartment
is
shopping
pretty
yet,
useful,
except for
actually.
online.
Especially when you're on a
I don't
budget.
know
Yeah.
if apartments are available in
I
Lawrence
never
or not.
had to,
I've heard it's pretty,
well, when I was
Could be.
in
Yeah. It's pretty tight, actually.
isn't that
4
bad?
years ago. like-
You usually have to start at one of those enormous complexes that has like, seriously, 200, 300 units. And they're kind of expensive.
Especially a single
Yeah.
person who can't.
And then while you're
They're
there, you dig
actually,
around.
Mathematical
better
equations,
place.
all this tax
Exactly right.
stuff.
Well, I guess I need to get on that.
Yeah,
Or I may
Hopefully.
be
yeah,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
out of
Hopefully.
luck.
poses some interesting.
We are approaching 3:10, so I turned our camera and mic back on.
Ooh, yeah.
Before the meeting starts, I will leave if there's nothing else for me.
I don't know of anything else that we need you for, Mr. Nye.
Thank you.
Five minutes.
Second.
Video's being a little slow to resume.
Let's try and
Mm-hmm. It's hardwired too. There we go. We're okay. We're good to resume regular session. $30 minutes.
Second.
To our three new commissioners, apologies for the somewhat longer meeting than usual.
we don't know any different.
That's right. It's always like this. Don't worry about it.
Exactly.
We never get out of here in 45 minutes. It's never happened.
You could have pleased us every meeting after this.
That's right.
Now our expectations have changed.
We are good for the motion.
This is different.
If we go over that, you have to buy donuts, though.
I didn't hear you.
Kyle, you're still muted.
If we go over that, you have to buy donuts for the next one.
Aye.
Live stream turns back on. I'm glad my phone battery that I'm using to check all of this is lasting.
Yes, you'll be a valuable member of this commission.
I think there've been issues with, internet.
All right.
I was having trouble when I was,
Well, we are
before I
back.
came in
Yes.
here.
As brand new, it's still having issues. I anticipate it'll be in person, but you know what happens sometimes. So this meeting, I think, was originally in person, and then a bunch of people had conflicts all of a sudden. I appreciate everyone making it to the meeting. So I'm glad that we actually had 9 people here today.
I just want to thank everyone for their patience. There's a lot of material today.
Yep.
Move to adjourn.
Second. Aye.
Oh,